Okay, when I say Frankenstein, what's the first thing that pops into your head? It's probably this guy, right? A huge monster, bolts in his neck, a mad scientist screaming, "It's alive!" during a crazy lightning storm. But what if I told you the real story, the one that actually inspired this masterpiece, is way stranger, a lot more gruesome, and all based on some pretty shocking real-world science? Let's dig in.
Because to get to the truth of it all, we first have to realize that the story we think we know is probably wrong. The whole pop culture version of Frankenstein has pretty much buried the fascinating and honestly kind of terrifying reality of where it all came from.
Yep, you heard that right. In Mary Shelley's original novel from 1818, the whole creation scene is super vague on purpose. There's no lightning storm, no creepy castle laboratory. In fact, Victor Frankenstein does all his work in his kinda shabby college apartment. And he definitely never screams that famous line. The real inspiration wasn't Hollywood magic. It was this bizarre scientific phenomenon that had all of Europe buzzing.
So our story really kicks off in the late 1700s. There was this strange new scientific obsession that seemed to totally blur the line between life and death. Scientists were asking this huge question: what actually is the spark of life? And the first clue, weirdly enough, came from twitching frog legs.
This big idea was called Galvanism. You see, scientists at the time were really wrestling with this massive question. What is life? What's the spark? And some of them, like an Italian scientist named Luigi Galvani, started to think that maybe, just maybe, it was a special kind of electricity, an animal electricity, that just flowed through all living things.
So this is Luigi Galvani, the guy who basically stumbled on this theory by accident. Back in the 1780s, he's dissecting a frog, and his assistant's metal scalpel touches a nerve, and bam! The dead frog's leg kicks out violently. He did the experiment over and over, and he became convinced he'd discovered the secret fluid of life itself.
Now this discovery kicked off a huge scientific fight. On the other side of the ring was Alessandro Volta. Yeah, the guy the Volta's named after, and he thought Galvani was totally wrong. He argued it wasn't some mystical animal electricity, it was just a simple chemical reaction caused by two different metals creating a current. A shock was a shock. And to prove his point, he went and invented the very first electric battery, the voltaic pile.
But the story doesn't stop there. See, Galvani had a nephew, a guy who would take his uncle's ideas out of the quiet laboratory and turn them into the most shocking, unbelievable public spectacle of the era. Meet Giovanni Aldini. This guy was a total showman. He was a true believer in his uncle's theory, and he took the experiments on tour. But he wasn't just messing with frogs, no. He was applying electrical currents to the severed heads of oxen, dogs, and sheep, making their dead muscles twist and grimace for sold-out crowds.
But his grand finale, his masterpiece, took place in London at the Royal College of Surgeons, and the subject this time, the freshly executed body of a murderer named George Foster. You can just imagine the scene. The room was packed with doctors, scientists, and important people, all holding their breath to see if Aldini could actually cheat death.
Using a powerful version of that voltaic pile, that early battery, Aldini and his team started applying these electrical rods to Forster's corpse. They connected the current to different parts of his body, and what happened next absolutely horrified and fascinated everyone in that room.
According to a newspaper report from The Times, Forster's jaw began to move. His muscles twisted into this horrifying grimace, and one of his eyes flew open. At one point, his right hand was raised and his fist actually clenched. I mean, can you imagine? Some people in the audience genuinely believed the man was on the eve of being restored to life. It's even said that one person was so frightened he died right there on the spot.
These gruesome public experiments created a huge cultural sensation. The idea that electricity could literally reanimate the dead wasn't just a fringe scientific theory anymore. It felt like a shocking, real possibility. And a young woman named Mary Shelley was paying very, very close attention.
But this wasn't just about creepy sideshows. These public displays were tapping into a really fierce philosophical debate that was raging at the time. You had the vitalists, who believed life needed some special, mysterious spark. And then you had the materialists, who argued that life was just complex chemistry and physics, that the body was basically a machine. The Shelley's own family doctor, William Lawrence, was a leading materialist, so Mary was right in the middle of these radical conversations.
So you can see how the stage was set. Aldini's shocking demonstration in 1803 plants the seed. Then the scientific debate rages on for years. And then we get to the famous year without a summer in 1816. Mary Shelley and her friends are trapped indoors by endless rain, so they decide to have a ghost story competition. They talked about science, about early evolutionary ideas, and specifically, they talked about galvanism. And that's when an idea started to form.
Mary Shelley herself described it as a waking dream that became her story. Just listen to her words. Uneasy, half-vital motion. That sounds almost exactly like the newspaper reports of Aldini's experiments, doesn't it? The powerful engine she imagined wasn't a bolt of lightning. It was the very same scientific gear that was captivating all of Europe.
But here's where the whole story takes a really important turn. Because Mary Shelley wasn't trying to write a science textbook. She used the most cutting-edge, radical science of her day to ask a much deeper, more timeless question.
And this is so crucial. She never actually explains the science. In the book, the exact method for creating life is a secret. Victor Frankenstein figures it out, sure, but he never tells us how. Why? Because for Shelley, the how was never the real point of the story.
This is the key line from the creation scene in the novel. Just listen to that language. Instruments of life, infuse a spark of being. It's all metaphorical, not technical. She's using the language of science to explore something much more profound, the morality of creation itself.
At the end of the day, Frankenstein isn't really a story about electricity bringing a monster to life. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when ambition gets way ahead of responsibility. It's about a creator who, in his own horror and disgust, just abandons his creation and the tragic fallout that follows. It's a warning against seeking knowledge without also seeking wisdom, and it's a powerful look at how society fears and rejects anything it sees as different.
And that brings us right back to today. The science might have changed from galvanism to things like artificial intelligence and CRISPR, but Mary Shelley's warning, well, it feels more on point than ever. She asked us to think about the consequences of our creations over 200 years ago, so the real question is, are we any better at listening now?